Hello and welcome to the Sex Within Marriage podcast. I'm JD from uncoveringintimacy.com, and we help Christian couples build intimacy and strengthen their marriage. From time to time, I get questions from our anonymous Have a Question page. There's a link to it in our show notes if you have a question. I received this one a bit ago, and I thought it would be good to answer it in its own post because it's a feeling that's common to a lot of marriages. I've heard the same complaint with very minor variations from many husbands and some wives. And like this person who asked it, if you don't know what's going on, it can lead to some bad assumptions. Maybe this has happened in your marriage. Here's the question. Am I going crazy, or is my wife subtly sabotaging things? I've often pointed out to my wife that there's a clear distinction in how she approaches our plans based on whether it's something she really wants or if it wasn't her idea. I've seen her move mountains and leap over obstacles in some areas of our life together, but in others, she's a never-ending font of potential issues, problems, and risk. They seem reliably separable into categories of what she really wants and what I possibly want more. One area I see this and is making me feel like I'm going crazy is our sex life. If we're going on a holiday and she wants to have lots of sex, she will plan ahead, bring outfits, lube, and be very vocal about it. It's great. Fantastic even. If it's a regular day we've scheduled sex, she won't exactly say no, but the likelihood of some kind of ailment popping up just on time is about 75%. Tiredness, tummy/digestive problems, a slight cough or cold, just enough to be a dampener. I particularly enjoy going down on her, but upon approach, she will just mention something's wrong. Some version of I haven't washed up yet or I had an upset stomach earlier. I like to make out, but after the first peck, she'll say something like, not too much though, I'm getting some sniffles yesterday. More so in the past, she would just physically behave like someone who would rather not be touched, almost as a knee-jerk reaction to my affection. It's just too much of a coincidence that when we're getting intimate, she will bring up the most off-putting topics in a way that perfectly sabotages the mood for me. Sometimes it'll just be something completely unrelated and left field. We do talk a lot, so I don't think it's a case of just needing more time to offload. We spend an abnormal amount of time together, talk at multiple points through the day, and usually a lot in the evenings too. I know she really likes to talk, and I'm willing to be a listening ear, but help me out here. I have raised this with her. She has previously denied it happens at all. She has admitted it now when I've pointed it out in the moment. She has explained some particular situations. She has apologized. She rejects my rationale that it has anything to do with desire or attraction. All this leaves me none the wiser as to how to move forward. She thinks it shouldn't be a blocker, but for me it is. It completely turns me off, and it leaves me feeling like a man she's trying to distract herself from or manage, rather than a man she's into. Is that just the plight of being a husband? When women have affairs with some guy they desire, do they ever bring up weird, unrelated issues right before they get intimate? I know you can't confirm if I'm imagining it, but is this something a lot of women do? Am I out of touch as a husband to expect that our only scheduled time to be intimate may not be the time to talk about an ingrown hair or pest control incident? Am I expecting too much of a choreographed encounter if I think we should both be at least trying to make it appealing? Okay, so like I said, I've heard this time and time again, and you've done what most people do in the same situation. You've set up this binary choice when there are other options, including what is probably going on. And the way it's framed, you can't win. Either you're going crazy, in which case you lose, or your wife is being malicious, in which case you also lose. And this is a bad way to frame things, particularly because neither are likely to be true. I doubt that you're crazy. I also doubt that your wife is malicious. Malicious spouses are actually pretty rare in my experience. I did post your question in our supporters forum, and unsurprisingly, both husbands and wives says this sounded very familiar. They experienced it too. The husbands tended to resonate with a frustration. The wives tended to resonate with a sense of shame or guilt because they know they've exhibited the same behavior. Although I want to again point out that I've seen this dynamic with the roles reversed as well. And because it's so common, this alone tells us something important. If it's a very common experience that consistently shows up across so many marriages, then it's likely not malicious. That's far more consistent with an autonomic response of some sort, because even the spouses who feel embarrassed that they behave this way don't know how to stop it or why they're doing it. That doesn't mean that these wives, or husbands in some cases, are actively trying to sabotage their sex life. In fact, if they're in my forum, they're at least sex positive and more likely trying to improve this part of their marriage. And yet, what you're describing is extremely common. So if it isn't madness and if it isn't malice, what is actually going on? And almost everything you describe points to one specific brain system. It's responsible for disgust avoidance and disease protection, central primarily in a region of the brain we call the insula. And if you're wondering where this is in the brain, head over to the blog post. There's a picture of it. The insula is a cortical region deep in the brain, heavily connected to the prefrontal cortex, which is the part right behind your forehead, and the limbic system. Its job is survival, not moral judgment, not relationship evaluation or health. This is just survival of itself. And the insula monitors internal bodily states and external contamination risk. It tracks things like hygiene and cleanliness, smells and tastes, bodily fluids, signs of illness, and internal sensations like nausea, fatigue, congestion, and discomfort. When the insula detects anything that might increase the risk of infection or physical harm, it produces an aversion response. It's not fear exactly, but it's a subtle signal that tells them to avoid this, whatever the thing that's setting it off is. That signal can show up as thoughts, feelings, urges, or verbalized concerns. And here's the part that's really confusing to you and many others. Sexual arousal changes insula activity. So when arousal increases, then dopamine-driven reward circuits ramp up, motivation and approach behavior increase, prefrontal inhibition relaxes, and the insula's disgust signaling is muted. And this is not just a guess. Research shows us that sexual arousal and disgust responses interact in the brain, and that arousal tends to dampen natural disgust reactions. The insula, which helps process both bodily feelings and disgust-relating signals, is part of a broader network that changes its activity when sexual arousal increases. There's a study on that effect. I'll link to it in the show notes and in the blog post as well. And this is why people willingly engage in behaviors during sex that would otherwise feel uncomfortable, unclean, or even disgusting outside of an aroused context. The system that normally says this could make you sick is temporarily dialed down, or actually changes functions. So with that in mind, look at the pattern being described. When intimacy begins before arousal is established, so when they're just starting, the insula's aversion mechanism is still fully active. Its job is to scan for problems. When it finds one, it speaks up. It's as if her brain has been asked, is there any health-related reason we shouldn't have sex right now? And off it goes, searching for anything that might qualify. Things it might not have noticed earlier suddenly come into the foreground because the system has been inadvertently prompted to look for them. That's why the objections are so reliably in the same category. I didn't shower. I had a stomach issue earlier. I might be getting sick. I don't feel clean. Not too much. I had sniffles. These are not random mood killers. These are exactly the kinds of things the insula is designed to notice when it's operating in its avoidance role. Now, once you're aroused, those same signals either never appear or don't feel important enough to mention. That's why the same woman can plan an elaborate sexual encounter in one context and then seem almost hyper-aware of bodily imperfections in another. In one context, that internal question never gets asked. In the other, it does. If it is asked, the answer is so quiet it doesn't even register. So the difference is not attraction. The difference is mental context. Is the insula doing its primary job of disgust avoidance, or has it switched to its secondary role? And for a long time, it was assumed that the insula shut down during sexual arousal, but fMRI scans show that this isn't true. The insula remains active. It just changes what it's doing. Instead of scanning for risk, it is retasked to track things like bodily pleasure, arousal-related sensations, heart rate, warmth, genital sensations, emotional intensity. In short, it switches from should we avoid this to what is happening in the body right now. And that's because the insula isn't just a disgust avoidance center. It's not just trying to avoid getting sick. It is an entire body awareness hub. So it doesn't merely stop blocking arousal. It actually contributes to it by amplifying bodily sensations and emotional intensity. And this is why I'm constantly telling husbands that they need to learn how to turn on their wife's brain. Mental arousal for women is critically important. If you're trying to generate desire using only physical touch, you're doing this on hard mode. the body is only one part of the system. When the brain becomes aroused, dopamine signaling increases, particularly through the nucleus accumbens, and at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, that part right behind your forehead, begins to quiet. And part of that, the medial prefrontal cortex, handles social self-evaluation and reputation management. This is where thoughts like, what would people think if they knew I did this? Or good girls don't like sex. That's where those thoughts tend to live and where they get generated. And then you have the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and it handles long-term consequence monitoring. Much of the messages that many women receive growing up about our sex lives lives here. Basically like, don't have sex because bad things will happen. Pregnancy, STDs, STIs, loss of approval, loss of God's love. Even when those reasons are no longer relevant, like when you're married and a child is perfectly fine, those pathways can still be very hard to override. And then you have the anterior cingulate cortex, which manages conflict between desire and values. This is where the it feels good, but it might be wrong tension shows up. That system also quiets during arousal. So in short, when arousal increases, all the functions we tend to lump together as inhibition, they decrease. The brain shifts from scanning for risk and judgment to focusing on experience. And this shift can be so dramatic that it almost feels like a different personality has emerged. Some wives feel deeply unsettled by this afterwards. They kind of come down from arousal, and those inhibitory systems come back online. Then they struggle to reconcile how willing, enthusiastic, or adventurous they felt the night before. That discomfort can lead to them feeling embarrassed, ashamed, or even scared. And in that state, it can feel a lot easier to believe that they were tricked, pressured, coerced, or anything rather than to accept that their own brain simply operated differently in a different context. So while they may have been even eagerly asking for certain things the night before, the next morning they feel conflicted because all the judgment, risk assessment, and damage control systems are back online. And if someone doesn't understand that it's possible to operate very differently in two mental states and still be the same person, then that internal conflict becomes intolerable. And when internal conflict becomes unbearable, we often push it outward and then blame our spouse instead, because that feels easier. But there's no need for that. She wasn't coerced. She wasn't tricked. She simply had a different perspective in a different neurological context. One system was temporarily down-regulated while another was up-regulated. And that shift produces a very real change in responses. And those responses are often what we interpret as personality. It's still the same person. It's just a very different context. Now, for the husband side, in this case, this lands like intentional sabotage because the timing is impeccable. As soon as you bring up sex, suddenly she doesn't feel well, and when she's never mentioned it before, or remembers she didn't shower, or any of the other myriad reasons. The information appears precisely when it will have the strongest dampening effect on your desire. And it's because the insula is being prompted just then by your initiation. And that's what kicks off its system check to see if there's any reason not to engage in sex. And if you start looking for reasons, you're probably going to find them. But from her side, it often probably feels like honesty or even responsibility. Her brain is saying, before this goes further, you should know whatever it's going to tell her now. And again, the problem is that you're trying to jump into sex without switching mental context for her first. You need to get that insula to switch into arousal awareness mode rather than why shouldn't we do this gatekeeping mode. And this is why telling someone to just relax or just get out of your head almost never works. Trying to override or make the insula switch gears with willpower usually increases anxiety, which further activates the insula, while also increasing cortisol, which decreases dopamine, which is what is needed for arousal. In short, just telling her just relax is going to do the opposite. That's why these situations often spiral instead of resolve. Now, knowing what's going on in the brain can be helpful. It can help us understand our spouse better, recognize that this isn't malicious behavior, but rather a good system that's just getting in the way sometimes. It can help us give our spouses grace when we feel hurt, ignored, or disconnected due to its hijacking of their libido. But it also gives us clues as to what approaches might work better. If the problem is that the disgust avoidance role is active before arousal has had a chance to switch its function, then the solution isn't trying to willpower your way through it because it's a subconscious system and they don't like to be ignored or overwritten. Instead, you need to change your order of operations. And scheduled sex gets blamed for a lot of things it didn't actually cause. But scheduled sex can absolutely work. For many couples, it is the only way intimacy happens at all. And what doesn't work is treating the scheduled time as the starting line instead of the finish line, or not giving enough time to ramp up. If a couple has barely interacted all day, or communication has been purely logistical, as many of us have during the day, then the scheduled time itself needs to include warm-up. You cannot expect arousal to switch on instantly just because the clock says it's time now to have sex. That warm-up does not have to mean flirting all day or maintaining constant sexual energy, though when that's possible, that definitely helps, like when you're on vacation. It simply means that desire usually needs a transition period. You need time to connect. You need time to switch gears. You need time for arousal to arrive before intimacy is expected. Sometimes that means she is intentionally doing things that she already knows will help her move towards desire once the window opens. Other times it means he takes the lead during that scheduled time by slowing things down, reconnecting emotionally, letting arousal build instead of rushing towards the outcome. The point is not that intimacy needs to be manufactured all day long, though again, that definitely helps. The point is that if sex is planned after a long gap in connection, that plan needs to include space for desire to switch gears in the insula and other parts of the brain. Scheduled sex works best when it includes a runway, not when it assumes a cold start will somehow work this time. As an example, we have a pretty standard Friday night ritual, and our brains like rituals. We each shower, so we feel clean, which already takes out a lot of that insula-monitored objections. We observe Sabbath, so we don't work Friday nights to Saturday evenings, which means there's nothing we're expected to do, no jobs to complete, no work deadlines to worry about. We try to shut out the world on Sabbath, so we don't watch TV, movies, etc. Instead, we pick a book that helps us focus on our marriage, and we use it as a starting point for deep conversations. My wife reads while I listen and massage her, and this helps the insula switch over, not only because it includes some non-sexual touch, although it tends to get more sexual as we progress, but also because we tend to talk about intimate subjects, which makes us feel connected, bonded, and safe with each other. Friday nights almost always end well because we are intentional about manufacturing a context that works for us. And you are more than welcome to steal that routine if it works for you. I hope that helps. Now, if you have a question that you'd like to have answered, you can submit it on our anonymous Have a Question page. There's a link in the show notes. As well, if you're listening to this and you don't get our emails or didn't read our emails, as about half the people on our list don't, you may be interested in the last post that I did. I didn't do a podcast about it, but it's basically a workout routine to get you ready for Valentine's Day. If you ever thought, hey, I want to work out, but you lack the motivation, if being better at sex is a good enough motivation, there's a workout routine to make you better at sex. They are workouts specifically designed to help you with the things that you do during sex. So, lots of things like push-ups and hip thrusts and squats and things like that. We already have a few people who said that they'd join the challenge. I'm trying to do it myself. And if you want to join in, join in. You can find that and all of our other resources at www.uncoveringintimacy.com. And that's it for today. Talk to you next time.